All right, everyone. I think I may have it working over here now. I'm going to proceed as if we do, and we'll see what happens from there. So, thank you for those of you who are taking the time to join us for today's webinar. This is the first time that we're doing something quite like this, hence the the technical hiccups, despite the practicing and whatnot. So, bear with us if we encounter any other trouble besides this. We're hoping that by hosting this online, though, that we're going to be able to accommodate folks from all over the state, that are interested in bringing gleaning to their communities as well. So hopefully, this will all be worth it, and we can all learn together, near and far. So, if you have any questions or comments, or would like me to clarify anything during today's webinar, feel free to type them along in the chat along the right side of the video. There's about a 20 or 30-second delay from what I'm saying to when you're hearing it, though. So I'll do my best to keep an eye on that and kind of answer questions as they come up. And though I've scheduled this to last till about 1, I expect to get through this presentation fairly quickly. So if you want to save your questions till the end, that should work just fine as well. I also have GleanKY's Outreach Director, Madison McRill, sitting in with us today to kind of keep up with anything. So she may be able to answer questions that people post over there as well. And if you need to drop out early, I know we got a late start, that's just fine. This will be recorded, and we'll have it posted and sent to you after the fact for you to watch at any time that's convenient to you. So with all that said, let's go ahead and begin. So today's session is the first in a 6-part webinar series we're calling our Master Gleaner Training. I've put this together kind of as a means of training people throughout the entire state on how our model works, with the hopes of making it more readily available to those interested in having gleaning happening in their communities as well. I'm hoping to have both longtime volunteers in this webinar as well as people completely new to the whole gleaning idea, just as a way for us to all get on the same page together and for us to learn from each other and our experiences as well. Today's webinar is going to give a quick overview of how and why GleanKY got started, how it has grown, and what our goals are for the future. And then we'll go through a basic volunteer training at the end of everything. The remaining webinars you can kind of see up here on the screen. They're going to go into further detail about a lot of the specific things that you're hearing about today. You'll hear, about farmers market gleaning or managing volunteers or health and safety things a little bit today. But I'm going to devote an entire session to that later on this year. So I hope you'll join us back for that. So with that all in mind and out of the way, I guess we can go ahead and get started. How GleanKY got started. So GleanKY was started in the spring of 2010. That was kind of an outgrowth of a gardening class that was being taught through Beaumont Presbyterian Church here in Lexington. The instructor and the attendees kind of had some ongoing conversations that summer about, how they could use food that would otherwise be going to waste to help alleviate food insecurity that was happening throughout their community. The idea of gleaning was introduced, though it was ancient. They wanted to kind of figure out how they could adapt that idea for modern use in their community. So I want to get this kind of put out in front of everything. There's 2 big statistics that we talk about when we talk about our work. That 1 in 6 Kentuckians is considered food insecure, which means that they don't necessarily know where their next meal is going to come from. And all the while, it's estimated that 40% of the food produced in the United States never gets eaten. So when you see these 2 statistics next to each other, it's easy to think that there may just be a way that we can solve both of these problems at once. So our mission, I think it's also important to kind of put this out in front as well, is to gather and redistribute excess fresh fruits and vegetables to nourish Kentucky's hungry. So to get back to those initial volunteers that met at Beaumont Presbyterian, that first group, they went out to the Lexington Farmers Market in the summer of 2010 to see just what they could get going. They asked the farmers there, what do you do with the produce that you have left over at the end of a market day? And so Some of the farmers were occasionally finding feeding agencies to donate their produce to, but many of them said that they're more likely to take that produce back to their farm where they would either compost it or feed it to the animals, or maybe they'd get around to eating some of it, but a lot of it was still going to waste, unfortunately. And so when the farmers told them that they would be happy to come to the farmers market every week, collect that extra produce, and then deliver it on their behalf, the farmers were really interested in that, and they were grateful for a more productive and dependable outlet for their unsold produce. GleanKY's model is really simple, but it's adaptable. It requires identifying a source of produce, so that can be a farmer's market, a farm, an orchard, a grocery, a home garden, and then someone who needs that produce. So that can be a feeding agency or a soup kitchen or a food pantry, neighborhood ambassador, a backpack program, anyone that needs extra produce to add to their feeding programs, and then connecting the two, the source and the recipient, with GleanKY and our volunteers. And though our scope of our work has grown really considerably since this idea was begun, that basic model has really not changed at all since we've started our work, and we hope that we can maintain that basic model into the future as well. So as word spread about the gleaning going on at the farmers market, other farmers and orchard owners and home gardeners approached these volunteers. Really love you to come and glean our produce as well. And this was really great news. People were excited about what we were doing, but it meant that we'd need to find more volunteers to kind of help manage the work, the increased demand for all of this work. So these volunteers, they started going out to churches and clubs and after-school programs and looking for other volunteers to help handle the other gleaning opportunities that were being offered to them. And as they gained more and more momentum, they were invited to more and more orchards and farms and more home gardens throughout the area. And with the help of all these groups that they'd worked to recruit, they did have the volunteers they needed to support and respond to this increased level of work. Initially, this group of volunteers, they'd kind of hoped just to glean a few thousand pounds over the course of the farmers market season. But by the end of 2010, their work had not ended, and they'd gleaned 37,561 pounds of produce by the end of the year. Over the next few years, more and more people heard about the work GleanKY was doing, and we began even gleaning at groceries all over town as well. And I'll talk more about this at a later session, but this can be a little trickier to work out due to existing relationships and partnerships between groceries and feeding programs throughout the country. But still, there are many gaps that often exist where groceries don't have a really reliable outlet for their excess produce. So GleanKY built relationships with these groceries that needed a more reliable partner. And currently, groceries account for the majority of the produce that we glean in a given year. So though we'd been gleaning produce outside of Fayette County already, around 2014, we began hearing from people in nearby counties who wanted to see gleaning happening in their communities as well. So these community leaders, they reached out to us, and they worked with their own networks in their own counties and their own communities through their churches and their schools and their clubs to build up a volunteer base and respond to growers in their area that had excess produce, and then to deliver that produce to agencies working in their own communities. Around that same time, in 2014, GleanKY hired their first full-time staff person to handle the growing amount of work being done by the organization. And over the next few years, they started looking for more ways to manage all this work without the use of just emailing everyone every time they needed something done. Gradually, they began building systems to help more easily manage volunteers and to respond more effectively to sources and recipients of produce. So on the left there, you can see a screenshot of signup.com. We use this for managing our recurring volunteer spots. It keeps a running list of volunteer opportunities that a gleaner can get on, and they can see in their own time a spot that works for them. They sign up on their own, and they can just go and glean once they've been trained. On the right, you can see a screenshot of remind.com. We use this for our rapid response lists where we gather volunteers quickly to respond to like farm and orchard gleaning opportunities. So this is kind of a contact list that we use to send a text message to many people all at once to gather volunteers for short notice farm and orchard gleaning. And then also with Remind.com, once we've gathered that produce, we have to find a way to get it out to our partners quickly. So we've put together bumper crop lists for different communities where we're able to communicate quickly and effectively with recipient groups when there are large amounts of produce that comes in. Basically, it's the same idea. We text a bunch of our representatives from different agencies, and then they let us know how much produce they would like to receive of a certain kind when we have that available. So since 2010, we've grown more and more each year, and all added up, we've gleaned and donated over 1.6 million pounds of fresh produce since we started our work just over 9 years ago. Most recently, in 2018, the records we have, we gleaned from 41 different produce sources. We delivered that produce to 96 different recipient groups spread across 14 counties and saved 252,317 pounds of produce from going to waste just last year. Want to also just tell you kind of about the impact of what we're doing. Each year we do a program evaluation where we survey our recipient groups to get an idea of just how effective our work is. And in 2018, we heard from them that 100% of the partners we have are able to serve food with greater nutrition because they receive produce from us. 94% can serve a greater selection of food, and 73% are able to serve a larger group of clients than they were without the produce they receive from us. So now our goal is to sustain and strengthen our existing work while providing the tools and resources that we've developed to those interested like yourself in starting gleaning efforts in their own communities. We've sort of shifted away from initiating conversations with community members just for the sake of growing and more towards allowing people to approach us when they're interested in gleaning. And by doing this, we're hoping that we're able to build better and more lasting programs throughout the state, even if it does mean that we're growing more slowly. Eventually, we hope to grow to a point where we're having, a regional staff person throughout, different parts of the state to aid community leaders with recruitment and training volunteers, as well as, managing relationships and outreach with produce sources and agencies that are distributing that produce in the region. But again, we're hoping that this structure kind of develops naturally, that we can place these staff members in areas of the state, as we need to do it. So if demand happens out in the western part of the state, we want to put someone there. If someone, many people contact us from northern Kentucky, we'd want to put someone there, as demand requires that we do that. But yeah, that's kind of the long and short of GleanKY and how we got started. And now that we've done that, I'd like to kind of just go deeper and more specific into, what gleaning actually looks like. So there's a handful of different types of gleaning, but they do all follow that same basic model that I mentioned before, where we do find a source of produce, a group that needs that produce, and then we connect the two with our volunteers and our staff. So since we did get started by Gleaning Farmers Market, I thought that'd be a good place to start and talk more about gleaning at farmers markets. So generally, to get started gleaning at a farmers market, it's best to approach whoever's organizing the market to gauge, whether it's going to be a good fit, to ask their permission to come to the market and things like that. If they're open to the idea, you can ask if they're going to be willing to help you pitch the idea to the vendors at the market. And then at that point, it's always good to also let the farmers know that any produce that they give you will be donated and that you will then turn around and donate the produce to people who need it at no cost to them. Just to make that clear to people up front. If farmers are interested in having gleaners come to the market, that's super great. You want to work with the market organizers then to, pick a first date to go out and glean, and then to establish a schedule that they can expect to see gleaners come to the farmers market. From there, it's going to be really important to be consistent and to glean on a predictable basis. You want to glean at the beginning and the end of the season, even when you know yields are going to be a little bit lower. You want to glean in whatever weather. Farmers love to see people come out in the rain, and it means a lot to them. And if you can stick to showing up on a weekly basis, you're going to be able to show farmers that you're serious about what you're doing. Whereas if you only send volunteers when you feel like it, it's going to be tough to get people to buy into the whole thing. One of the best reasons to glean at the farmers market is that it allows you to meet a lot of farmers at once. Most of the farms that we glean in a given year are farmers that have met us at the farmers market. We've gotten to know them, and then they invite us to come out and glean at their property afterwards. So next I want to talk about gleaning farms and orchards. Though we didn't start by gleaning this way, within the first few months that we were working, we were out, being called by farms and orchards to glean on site as well. So this can be a really great opportunity to get a lot of produce, a lot of one type of produce, which can help a lot of people, and oftentimes can help support several different feeding programs just from one glean, which is really exciting. So when a farm or an orchard owner calls us to see if we can glean, we ask them a handful of questions. We say, what kind of produce do you have? How much produce do you have for us to glean? Where is your farm? When would you need to have the produce gleaned by? And a handful of other things just to kind of get an idea of when and how many volunteers you'll need to provide. And once you have that basic information, it's all right to call them back, to tell them, I need to check with my volunteers, but I'll call you back to schedule a time to come out and glean once I have a better idea of who I can have come out. That said, very often farmers will call on pretty short notice with only 2 or 3 days before they need to till under their field. So tools like the rapid response and things like that really do make this a more doable type of gleaning to handle. So once you've confirmed a good time to glean with your volunteers and with the farmer, you'll assemble your volunteers, you'll get them out, and you'll head out to the farm. And though many times farmers will have produce already harvested that you'll just need to pick up from the farm, a lot of times you're really going to have to get out there with your volunteers and harvest it yourself. So with this in mind, keep an eye on the weather. Make sure you have your volunteers aware of it as well, that they'll dress appropriately. It's likely that you're going to be getting muddy and that it'll be hot. Often at the same time you'll be dealing with this. So wear clothes that make sense. Bring plenty of water to drink. Usually I suggest that, with farm gleaning that you aim to glean in the morning to beat the heat, to get out before it gets too hot. But, depending on schedules, it may be necessary to glean at other times to accommodate, the farmer or your gleaners. So just be ready for that and plan accordingly. At the farm, the farmer or the workers can guide you to where you'll be gleaning and how to most effectively harvest their produce, with your safety and with food safety in mind as well. We try to limit the gleaning time to about 2 hours on the farm, with the expectation that, sometimes you're just not going to be able to glean every bit of produce out there, but that by having a time limit like this, it allows us to get more volunteers, and that we're also going to have time at the end of it all to deliver the produce after the fact. So once you've gleaned, you'll work with your volunteers to determine who can help with delivering the produce to the recipients you've lined up. So I mentioned earlier the bumper crop list. There's a session we'll go into greater detail with that, but it's a really good tool to kind of let your recipient agency contacts know to expect a lot of produce and to plan on who you'll be delivering that to. So grocery gleaning. This can be a totally different experience than either farmer's market or farm gleaning. Where farm and orchard and farmer's market and garden gleaning are really kind of social events where you can get big groups of gleaners out. Grocery gleaning is kind of a more flexible thing where volunteers can sort of plug in when and how they like to. So once you've established a relationship with the grocery store, set up a schedule that works well for them, you can get that schedule put up online with signup.com. Your volunteers, your gleaners are going to be able to look through the schedule and then just sign up for a spot that works for their time. They'll get automatically sent to their email instructions on all they're going to need to know. Details about when to glean, who to call at the grocery. You're always going to want to make sure you call ahead to the grocery to make sure that they have produce to pick up. Where they're going to need to go to the store to pick up the produce, who they're going to want to call at the recipient agency, and all sorts of things like that. It should all be covered in those details on signup.com. With groceries, it can be really tough to know exactly what to expect. Some groceries will glean, 80 or 100 pounds one day, and then 400 pounds the next day, and then 2 days later we'll glean 800 pounds. So when you call ahead, you're always going to want to make sure that you ask for an estimate of just how much produce they're going to have for you. If it's more than you can handle on your own, it's good to call around to your friends or your family to see if someone can bring their car along with you to help handle a big load like that. It's also important to know, just what your body can handle. Grocery gleaning can often involve gleaning big, big boxes of produce, that are 30 or 40 pounds a piece. It also involves, steep loading docks and heavy carts. So know what you can handle so you don't get hurt doing that. Grocery gleaning typically takes place on weekday mornings because it's the time that works best for grocery receiving areas to accommodate us. So because of this, you want to be mindful of all the other activity happening around you. You want to do your best to allow whatever they're doing for the day to happen completely uninhibited. Altogether, it should take about an hour to glean and deliver produce from a grocery store. So a few years ago, GleanKY put together a formalized list of our core values, values that we do try to keep front of mind in everything that we do. Respect, the idea that we treat our recipients with the respect and dignity. Inclusiveness, we serve the underserved and food insecure populations of Kentucky. Empathy, we are committed to building relationships to better address the nutritional needs of our recipients. Engagement, we are dedicated to consulting and connecting our partners and our recipients with food education, storage, and preserving practices. Integrity, we supply our recipients with fresh, quality, edible produce. Free distribution, we form partnerships with people who provide fresh or free access to fresh produce. And food recovery, we encourage our partners to use all the food that they receive and to redistribute what they cannot use, and then to compost any food that becomes inedible. I want to dig just a little bit deeper around the idea of integrity. Our rule of thumb is that if you wouldn't eat it yourself, you shouldn't give it to someone else to eat. You can compost the produce, donate it to a farmer to feed to their animals, or if none of these are viable options, you can always throw it out before you pass it along to someone else. Generally, you want to kind of keep an eye out for mold and bruises, cuts, anything that would make the produce something that you wouldn't want to eat or pass along to someone. And then the final step of any gleaning, whether it's farm, grocery, orchard, farmer's market, garden gleaning, is to log your gleaning trip online for us. This is super important, but it only takes about 2 minutes to do. It'll ask you questions like where you gleaned, when you gleaned, where you delivered it, how long it took you to glean, and just a handful of other things. This is a really vital step in the entire process, as it kind of helps us keep track of everything that we're doing. We need to know how much we glean because we do fill out tax acknowledgments to all of our donors at the end of the year for them to know how much they've donated. But it's also important for us to know because we want to speak with authority about what we're doing, to have a really good, clear idea of what gleaning looks like, so we can find more volunteers, so we can do fundraising and grant writing, and just generally to be able to talk about what we do. You can find the recorded gleaning form on our website at any point. It's listed there in bold, to fill out whenever you glean. And finally, Below, you can find a handful of links that might prove useful for the people you run into. People that are really interested in being a part of what we're doing, where you can direct a potential volunteer, a potential produce source, a feeding program, or even someone that's interested in donating money. Not everyone has the time to be a volunteer gleaner, but lots of people can find other ways to help us spread the word about what we do, and this is a good list to send to them. So that about wraps up everything I wanted to cover today. Just kind of a basic, 20,000 foot view at our history, and then the different types of gleaning. Our next webinar is going to be on May 20th at noon. I'm going to be going a lot more in depth about how to get started gleaning in your community, with a specific look at how you can do that with farmers markets. So how you reach out to them, how you set up a schedule and find volunteers for that. And I hope you'll join us for that as well. So if you have any questions, you can always feel free to type them into the chat now or anything like that. You can always also just send me an email directly, and I'll do my best to get that back to you. You can find that email and my office phone number there on the slide, and I hope you'll reach out to me with any questions. But yeah, I think that about wraps it all up, and we will see you May 20th, where we'll be talking about farmers markets. So thanks so much for joining us, and we'll talk soon.